Rain hammered against the ancient shutters like fists trying to break through. Thunder shook the stone walls of the cellar, each rumble vibrating through the floor and up through Daniel's bones. He pressed himself against the cold foundation stones, feeling moisture seep through his shirt, feeling his heart pound against his ribs with a force that seemed louder than the storm itself. In his right hand, he gripped a syringe filled with clear liquid. Was it enough? That was the question that kept circling through his mind as the shadow of a raised gun crept slowly down the cellar stairs. Behind him, Elena lay on a makeshift bed of old blankets and moth-eaten quilts scavenged from the abandoned farmhouse above. Her breathing was shallow, labored, each exhale carrying a small sound of pain she couldn't quite suppress. The bandage around her midsection was dark with blood that had soaked through despite his best efforts. She was alive, but barely. Conscious, but fading. The footsteps above them stopped. Daniel held his breath. Secrets have a way of putting us all on islands. Daniel had come to this one 3 years ago to disappear, to stop being the person he'd been and become no one at all. Lena had come here to survive, to hide from men who wanted her dead for the crime of doing her job too well. Now they were both trapped in this hole in the ground, and the only way out was through the man with the gun. But this wasn't where the story began. The story began 2 days earlier, on a cold October afternoon, when the last ferry before the storm brought 2 strangers to Shelter Island. One of them was hiding, and one of them had come to kill. Please take a minute to like, comment, and subscribe. We upload new, exciting tales of true worth every day, and you won't want to miss what we have planned for tomorrow. 2 days before the cellar, 2 days before the blood and the gunfire and the desperate flight through the storm. The afternoon was cold but calm. The kind of late October day when the light turns golden and the air smells like wood smoke and dying leaves. The 3 o'clock ferry from the mainland cut through grey Atlantic swells, its diesel engine thrumming a rhythm that the gulls seemed to know by heart. They followed the boat in lazy circles, crying out to each other, hoping for scraps from the few passengers brave enough to stand on the open deck in the cutting wind. Shelter Island rose from the ocean ahead, a dark mass of rocky cliffs and pine forests, topped by a lighthouse whose beam wouldn't ignite until dusk. The island was 12 miles off the coast of Maine, accessible only by this ferry, home to 60 souls in winter and 400 in summer. But summer was long gone now. The vacation houses stood empty, their windows boarded against the coming storms. The streets were quiet. The restaurants were closed. Only the year-round residents remained. Fishermen, retirees, people who had chosen isolation for reasons they rarely discussed. Dr. Daniel Mercer stood on the dock, watching the ferry approach. He wasn't waiting for anyone in particular. He came here most afternoons when the weather allowed, one of the few routines he'd established in his 3 years on the island. There was something meditative about watching the boat arrive, about seeing the faces of the people who stepped off, about wondering what had brought them to this forgotten place at the edge of the world. He was 44 years old, tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair that had grown slightly too long, and a face that might have been handsome before grief carved lines into it. His hands were shoved deep in his jacket pockets, but even at rest they moved with a precision that seemed out of place. The economical, deliberate movements of someone trained to work in millimeters, where a fraction of an inch meant the difference between life and death. The ferry docked. Captain Pete Gunderson, a weathered man of 55 who had been running this route for 30 years, began tying off lines while his deckhand lowered the gangway. "Storm coming," Pete called out to anyone listening. "Big one. Weather service says nor'easter, sustained winds over 50, gusts to 70. Last ferry until she passes. Anyone wants to get back to the mainland. You've got about 10 minutes to decide." No one moved toward the gangway. The handful of passengers, locals returning from supply runs mostly, made their way off the boat and scattered toward their homes. Then she appeared. Daniel noticed her immediately, and not because she was beautiful, though she was, in that sharp-featured, intelligent way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness. Dark hair pulled back from her face, pale skin that suggested she spent her days indoors, under fluorescent lights, reading documents and arguing cases. Eyes that swept the dock with a vigilance that didn't match her casual vacation clothes. She was afraid. Daniel recognized fear. He'd lived with it long enough to know its various disguises, and this woman wore hers like a coat she couldn't quite button properly. Everything about her said relaxed traveler, but her body language screamed hunted animal. She approached Ruth Callahan, who ran the island's only general store from a weathered building near the dock. Ruth was 68, had been born on this island and would probably die on it, and knew everyone's business without ever seeming to pry. "I'm looking for the Whitfield cottage," the woman said. "Do you know it?" Ruth's face brightened with recognition. "Little Elena. Lord, you must be 30 years older than when I saw you last. You're Margaret's granddaughter, aren't you? Used to spend summers here when you were just a slip of a thing." "That's right. The cottage, is it still standing?" "Still there, though it's been empty since your grandmother passed. Nobody's touched it in years." Ruth studied the woman with the practiced eye of someone who had watched generations come and go on this island. "You sure you want to stay there alone? Storm's coming, big one." "That's exactly why I want to stay." There was something in her voice when she said it, a finality, a determination, that made Daniel's instincts prickle. She wasn't here for nostalgia. She wasn't here to revisit childhood memories. She was here because this island, cut off from the mainland when storms came, represented something she needed desperately: safety, invisibility, a place to disappear. He was still watching her when the second stranger disembarked. The man was average in every way that mattered: medium height, medium build, forgettable face. The kind of person you'd pass on the street without registering, whose description you couldn't recall 5 minutes after meeting them. He carried photography equipment, a camera bag over one shoulder, a tripod case in his hand. He told Ruth he was here to photograph the fall foliage and seabirds before the storm. But Daniel watched him watch the woman walk away. The man's eyes tracked her with a focus that had nothing to do with photography. There was no casual interest in his gaze, no tourist curiosity. There was intent, purpose, the patient attention of a predator who had found his prey. Daniel had seen that look before, in emergency rooms, on the faces of men waiting to hear whether their victims had survived, in police stations, when suspects realized their stories weren't holding up, in his own mirror, on the worst nights, when he wondered if the person he'd become was worth saving. That's not a photographer, he thought. That's a hunter. The woman, Elena, Ruth had called her, disappeared up the path toward the interior of the island, toward the cottage that had been her grandmother's. The photographer lingered at the dock, making a show of adjusting his equipment, waiting until she was out of sight before following at a careful distance. Daniel should have minded his own business. That was the whole point of being here. No involvement, no connections, no risk. He'd spent 3 years building a life of careful isolation, and every instinct told him to walk away. to let whatever was happening between these two strangers play out without his interference. But some instincts run deeper than self-preservation. He found himself walking toward Ruth's store, where he bought supplies he didn't need and asked questions he shouldn't have been asking. The woman who was just here, Elena, she's staying at the Whitfield place. Ruth nodded. Came back after all these years. Funny how life works. Her grandmother always said Elena would return someday. And here she is. And the photographer? He's staying on the island too? Took a room at the inn. Said he'll be here a few days, weather permitting. Ruth gave Daniel a knowing look. You're awfully interested in the new arrivals. Just curious. Ruth had known Daniel for 3 years, which meant she knew exactly how uncurious he normally was about anything beyond his clinic and his patients. Storm's going to hit hard tonight. Power will go out, always does. Cell tower on the mainland will probably go down too. We'll be on our own for a few days. How long until the next ferry? 3 days minimum. Maybe 4 if the seas don't calm. She studied him. You worried about something, Doc? Just making sure I have enough supplies at the clinic. He left before she could ask more questions, but her words stayed with him. 3 days, maybe 4. Cut off from the mainland, no power, no communications. If something happened on this island during the storm, there would be no calling for help. He passed Constable Hal Murphy on his way back to the clinic, 72 years old, arthritic in both hips, wearing a badge that was mostly ceremonial these days. Hal had been the island's only law enforcement for 40 years, though the job mostly consisted of mediating disputes about property lines and making sure teenagers didn't get too rowdy during summer parties. Evening, Doc, Hal said. Ready for the blow? As ready as anyone. You? Got my generator fueled and my bourbon stocked. What else does a man need? Hal chuckled, but there was genuine contentment in his voice. He'd made peace with his limitations long ago. Daniel wished he could say the same. The storm began in earnest around 7 o'clock. It started with the wind, gusts that rattled windows and bent the pines nearly horizontal. Then the rain came, not in drops but in sheets, horizontal walls of water that reduced visibility to nothing. The power flickered at 7:15, again at 7:30, and finally went out completely at 7:47. The island switched to generator power and lanterns, settling into the practiced routine of people who had weathered many such storms before. Daniel's clinic was a converted cottage near the harbour. 2 examination rooms, a small surgical suite for emergencies, a generator that kept the critical equipment running. He checked his supplies for the 3rd time, confirmed that everything was in order, and tried to convince himself that his restlessness was about the storm and nothing else. It didn't work. Through the clinic window, he could see the harbour path, illuminated intermittently by lightning. And in one of those flashes, he saw the photographer, the man with the camera bag, walking through the rain toward the interior of the island, toward the Whitfield cottage, not hurrying despite the weather, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who had all the time in the world. Daniel checked his phone. No signal. The mainland tower was already down. He thought about Constable Hal, asleep in his cottage with his bourbon and his ancient revolver. He thought about Ruth, probably reading by candlelight, trusting the storm to pass as storms always did. He thought about himself 3 years ago, arriving on this island with nothing but a medical bag and a determination to disappear, to stop being Dr. Daniel Mercer, rising star of trauma surgery, and become no one at all. And he thought about the woman in the Whitfield cottage, Eleanor, Alone, afraid, being stalked by a man whose intentions were clearly not photographic. He should stay here, mind his own business, let whatever was going to happen, happen. Instead, he grabbed his medical bag and headed out into the storm. The path to the Whitfield cottage wound through dense pine forest that provided some shelter from the wind, but none from the rain. Daniel was soaked within minutes, his clothes plastered to his body, his medical bag clutched against his chest to protect its contents. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, thunder following so close that the sound was almost continuous. A rolling, crashing cacophony that made it impossible to hear anything else. The cottage appeared through the trees like a ghost, dark except for the warm glow of lantern light in the front windows. It was a small place, shingled in the New England style, with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. The kind of cottage that families had been building on these islands for 200 years. Daniel climbed the porch steps, hesitated, then knocked. The door opened a crack. Eleanor's face appeared in the gap, illuminated by the lantern she held. Her expression shifted from fear to confusion to wary assessment in the span of 2 seconds. "Who are you?" "I'm the island's doctor, Daniel Mercer." "Ruth mentioned you were staying here alone. I wanted to make sure you had emergency supplies." "I'm fine." "The power's out across the island. Cell service is down. The storm's going to get worse before it gets better." She studied him through the gap, and he could see her calculating, threat assessment, risk analysis, the rapid mathematics of someone who had learned to trust no one. "How do I know you're really a doctor?" He held up his medical bag. "I could show you my license, but it wouldn't mean much in the dark. I could also leave, if you'd prefer. But if something happens during this storm, I'm the only medical help you're going to get." She weighed his words, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in, but stay where I can see you." The cottage interior was exactly what Daniel had expected. Dusty, filled with furniture that hadn't been moved in years. Photographs on the wall showing a dark-haired girl at various ages. Elena as a child laughing on the beach. Elena as a teenager holding up a fish she'd caught. Elena and an elderly woman, who must have been her grandmother, standing arm in arm on this very porch. "I haven't been here in 20 years, Elena said, following his gaze to the photographs. "Not since my grandmother died." "Why now?" She didn't answer. Instead, she changed the subject with the practiced deflection of someone accustomed to interrogation. "You're not from the island originally." "No. I came here 3 years ago, running from something." The question hit closer to home than she could have known. Something like that. They stood in the small living room, the lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls, the storm howling outside like something alive and hungry. There was a fireplace with wood stacked beside it, and Daniel gestured toward it. "Mind if I start a fire? The temperature's going to drop tonight." "Go ahead." He built the fire with the efficiency of practice, and soon flames were crackling, adding their warmth and light to the room. Eleanor watched him work, and he was aware of her attention, not hostile exactly, but assessing, evaluating. The way you'd watch someone you weren't sure you could trust. "You have medical training," she said suddenly. He looked up from the fire. "I'm a doctor." "No, I mean," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "The way you move, the way your hands work. You were a surgeon." He went very still. "How did you know?" "My father was a cardiac surgeon. He died when I was 12. Heart attack of all things. But I remember his hands. The way he held things, the precision, the economy of movement. Like every gesture had been rehearsed 1,000 times until there was nothing wasted. She gestured at Daniel's hands, which had paused in the act of adding a log to the fire. Your hands move the same way. You're observant. It's my job to be observant. She sat down in one of the old armchairs, and some of the tension left her shoulders. Not all of it. She was still coiled, ready to spring, but enough to suggest she was beginning to believe he wasn't a threat. What kind of surgeon were you? Trauma? Emergency surgery? The cases nobody else wanted? Gunshot wounds, car accidents, industrial injuries. Were? I lost my license 3 years ago. Malpractice case. What happened? He should have deflected, should have changed the subject the way she had. But there was something about this woman. Her directness, her intelligence, the way she asked questions like she actually wanted to know the answers, that made him want to tell the truth. A patient died on my table. 23 years old, same age as my son. He had a congenital heart defect that nobody had diagnosed. Not the referring physician, not the emergency room doctors, nobody. By the time he got to me, he was already dying. I did everything right, but he died anyway. And they blamed you? His family needed someone to blame. The hospital needed a scapegoat. I was convenient. He stared into the fire. They doctored the records, made it look like I'd missed obvious signs, ignored symptoms I should have caught. By the time the truth might have come out, I'd already lost my license, my reputation, my marriage, everything I'd built in 20 years. So you came here. I came here to disappear, to stop being Dr. Daniel Mercer, prestigious surgeon, respected colleague, devoted husband, and become no one. The island doctor who patches up fishermen and checks blood pressure. He met her eyes. What about you? What are you running from? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the storm seemed to intensify. Wind shrieking around the corners of the cottage. Rain hammering against the windows with renewed fury. Elena opened her mouth to answer, and that's when the shot came. It was quiet, suppressed, but Daniel knew the sound. He'd worked enough gunshot wounds to recognize it, even through the noise of the storm. A sharp crack, almost lost in the thunder, followed by the sound of Elena gasping as she pitched forward out of her chair. He was moving before his conscious mind caught up, crossing the room in 3 strides, catching her before she hit the floor. Blood was already spreading through her fingers where she clutched her right side, dark red against the cream-colored sweater she wore. The porch, she gasped. I went out to check the shutters. Daniel dragged her away from the windows, behind the solid mass of the fireplace. His hands were already assessing the wound, pulling back her sweater, exposing the entry wound just below her ribs. Through and through, he said, his voice steady even as his mind raced. Right side, below the ribs. Missed the major organs. You're lucky. Doesn't feel lucky. Can you move? We need to get to my clinic. He's out there. I know, but we can't stay here. He knows exactly where you are. We'll go through the forest. In this rain, he won't be able to track us. You don't understand. Her voice was tight with pain, but there was something else in it. A desperate urgency. Whoever did this, they're professional. They planned this. How do you know? Because I've been waiting for them for 3 years. There was no time for more questions. Daniel helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they stumbled toward the back door. The rain hit them like a wall when they stepped outside, cold, driving, so heavy that Daniel could barely see the trees 10 feet away. They plunged into the forest. The path was treacherous. roots hidden under running water, mud that sucked at their feet, branches whipping at their faces with every gust of wind. Elena was weakening fast, her breathing ragged, her weight increasingly heavy against Daniel's shoulder. But she kept moving, kept fighting, her jaw clenched against the pain. It took them 40 minutes to cover a distance that should have taken 10. By the time they reached the clinic, Daniel was half carrying her and she was barely conscious. He got her inside, locked the door, pulled the heavy shutters closed. The generator was running. He had light, heat, equipment. He eased her onto the examination table and began working with hands that remembered every procedure even after 3 years away from an operating room. The bullet had passed through cleanly. A small entry wound, a slightly larger exit wound, no evidence of organ damage. But she'd lost blood, and the wound needed to be cleaned and sutured before infection set in. As he worked, she talked. The words came slowly at first, broken by gasps of pain, but gradually forming into a story that explained everything Daniel had sensed about her from the moment she stepped off the ferry. "I'm a federal prosecutor," she said. "Was. I worked organized crime. 3 years ago, I was the lead on the biggest case of my career. Rafael Valdez, head of the Valdez cartel. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering. We put him away for life." "Cartel," Daniel repeated, his hands continuing their work. "And they want revenge. 3 months ago, word came through back channels. Valdez put out a contract on me from prison. $2 million. And you came here instead of taking protection. I was offered witness protection. New identity, new life. Disappear forever." She laughed bitterly, then winced as the movement pulled at her wound. "I refused. I didn't want to stop being Elena Vance. I thought I could be smart enough to stay ahead of them. That's why the island, a place you knew, completely off the grid. This cottage is still in my grandmother's name. The property was never transferred after she died. I thought..." She closed her eyes. "I thought no one would find me here. Do you know who shot you? I know who it probably is. A man named Marcus Kane. He's a ghost. Works exclusively for cartels. Never been photographed, never been caught. The FBI has a file on him with almost nothing in it. No one who's seen his face has lived to describe it." Daniel's hands went still. "There was a man on the ferry. Said he was a photographer, but I watched him follow you." Elena's eyes opened, sudden fear replacing the pain-dulled resignation. "You saw him. Average height, average build, forgettable face. The kind of person you wouldn't remember 5 minutes after meeting. That's how he works. That's how he gets close." She struggled to sit up. Daniel gently pushed her back down. "If he's on this island, if he saw where I went, he knows you're wounded now. He'll come to finish the job. Then you need to leave. Get away from me. He won't care about you unless you get in his way." "I'm not leaving. You don't owe me anything." "I'm not leaving," Daniel repeated, his voice firm. "Partly because I took an oath a long time ago, and I meant it even if the medical board didn't, and partly because..." He paused, searching for words. "Because I came to this island to stop being who I was, to hide, and hiding is starting to feel worse than whatever I was hiding from." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, the wariness softening, the walls lowering just slightly. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both." He finished the last suture, applied a clean bandage. "Now rest. I need to think." Dawn broke grey and violent, the storm still raging at full strength. Through the clinic's shuttered windows, Daniel could see nothing but driving rain and bent trees. the world reduced to a narrow circle of chaos. Elena was asleep, her fever rising despite the antibiotics. The wound was clean, but her body was fighting on too many fronts: blood loss, shock, fear, exhaustion. She needed rest and time, neither of which they had in abundance. Daniel made a careful circuit of the clinic's exterior, staying close to the walls, using the storm as cover. The rain was so heavy that visibility was measured in feet, not yards. Anyone could be 10 steps away and invisible. He found what he was looking for near the back door: footprints in the mud, partially washed away but still visible. Someone had circled the clinic during the night, testing the doors, checking the windows. Kane knew they were here. He was waiting for something. Better conditions, maybe, or certainty that Elena was helpless. Back inside, Daniel checked his supplies. He had enough antibiotics and painkillers for several days. He had surgical tools, suture kits, bandages. And he had one thing that might make a difference: a vial of ketamine, the sedative he kept for emergency situations when a patient needed to be immobilized quickly. 200 milligrams would drop a man in 20 seconds, if he could get close enough. The knock at the door made him reach for the scalpel before he realized it was too gentle to be a threat. "Doc, it's Ruth." He let her in, closing the door quickly behind her. She was wrapped in a rain slicker, water streaming from the brim of her hat, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "Heard some things that worried me," she said. "Came to check on you." "What kind of things?" "That photographer fellow was at the general store this morning, early, before the storm really picked up, asking questions about the Whitfield cottage, about who lived there, about you." She looked past him, toward the back room where Elena was resting. "There's a woman in your clinic, and there's blood on your back porch that the rain hasn't quite washed away." There was no point in lying. Ruth had known this island for nearly 70 years. She'd seen more than she'd ever tell. "She's in trouble," Daniel said. "Someone's trying to hurt her, a professional." Ruth's expression didn't change. "What do you need?" "A place to hide her, somewhere he won't look." "The old Perkins farmstead, 1.5 miles up the North Ridge. Been abandoned since the fire in '98. Most folks think it burned down completely, but the cellar's intact. Root cellar from the old days, built to store food through winters. You could ride out a hurricane down there if you had supplies. Can you show me on a map?" "I can do better than that." Ruth pulled a folded paper from her pocket, a hand-drawn map, the kind that only existed in the heads of long-time islanders. "I sketched this out before I came. Figured you might need it." "Ruth, don't thank me. Just keep that girl alive." She pulled her slicker tighter. "I'll keep the photographer busy if I can. Ask him about bird-watching spots. Get him talking about his equipment. Men like that love to talk about themselves. Be careful. He's dangerous." "I've been dealing with dangerous men since before you were born, Doc. I know how to handle myself." She left, disappearing into the storm like a ghost. Daniel studied the map, committing the route to memory, then went to wake Elena. The journey to the farmstead was brutal. Elena could barely walk, so Daniel supported most of her weight, half carrying her through the forest, while rain hammered down and wind tried to knock them off their feet. The path Ruth had drawn wound through dense undergrowth, crossing streams swollen into rivers, climbing ridges that turned into waterfalls of mud. Eleanor stumbled and fell more than once. Each time, Daniel pulled her up, urged her forward, refused to let her stop. "Leave me," she gasped at one point, after a fall that left her lying in 6 inches of water, too exhausted to rise. Get help. Come back. There is no help. The ferry won't run for days. The constable is 72 years old with bad hips. I'm all you've got. Then we're both going to die out here. Not today. He hauled her to her feet, draped her arm over his shoulder, started walking again. Not today. The Perkins farmstead appeared through the trees after an hour of struggle. A collapsed barn. A house that was mostly ruin. Foundations being slowly reclaimed by the forest. But beneath a tangle of brush and fallen branches, exactly where Ruth's map said it would be, was a cellar door. The cellar was dark, damp, cold, but it was solid. Stone walls 2 feet thick, a ceiling of heavy beams that had supported the house above, now holding up nothing but earth and debris. The air smelled of mold and old vegetables, the ghost of the root cellar it had once been. Daniel settled Elena on a pile of blankets he'd brought in his pack. She was shivering, her fever spiking, her bandage soaked through with rain and blood. He changed the dressing, adjusted her medications, did what he could with the limited supplies he'd been able to carry. I have to go back, he said, when she was as stable as he could make her. Get more supplies. Make sure he hasn't found this place. And if he catches you, he won't. I've been walking this island for 3 years. I know it better than anyone except Ruth. Daniel. She grabbed his hand, the first time she'd used his name. Be careful. I'm always careful. No, I mean, she struggled to find words. I mean, if it comes down to you or me, save yourself. I'm not worth dying for. He looked at her for a long moment, at the strength in her eyes despite the fever, the determination despite the fear. That's not your call to make, he said, and headed back into the storm. The clinic had been searched. Daniel approached carefully, circling through the trees, watching for any sign of movement. The door was standing open, rain blowing into the front room. Inside, drawers had been pulled out, supplies scattered, his medical log spread across the examination table. Kane had been here, had seen the bloody bandages in the trash, the surgical tool still damp from use. He knew Elena was alive, knew she'd been treated here. Daniel gathered what he needed quickly. More antibiotics, more painkillers, extra bandages, the vial of ketamine. He also took the flare gun from his emergency kit. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. He was about to leave when he heard footsteps on the porch. Doc, you in there? Constable Hal Murphy appeared in the doorway, rain dripping from his hat, his ancient revolver visible at his hip. Hal, what are you doing out in this? Ruth came by, said there might be trouble. The old man's eyes swept the ransacked clinic. Looks like she was right. Daniel made a decision. There was no time for half-truths, no room for careful omissions. There's a woman on this island being hunted by a professional killer. She's a federal prosecutor, put away a cartel boss. Now they want her dead. Hal's weathered face didn't change. What do you need? I need you to watch for him. The photographer who came in on the ferry, his name is Marcus Kane. He's armed and dangerous. Don't approach him. But if you see where he goes, let me know. How am I supposed to find you? I'll come to you. Every few hours if I can. Hal nodded slowly. I may be old, Doc, but I'm not useless. Still got my eyes, still got this. He patted the revolver. If I see this Kane fellow, I'll find a way to let you know. Hal, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're a long way from out of this. Daniel headed back into the storm, toward the farmstead, toward Elena, toward whatever came next. The cellar had become their world. For 2 days, Daniel shuttled between the farmstead and the island's other buildings, gathering supplies, checking for signs of Cain, reporting back to Hal. The storm showed no signs of weakening. If anything, it seemed to intensify, as if the weather itself was conspiring to keep them trapped. Eleanor's fever rose and fell in unpredictable waves. In her lucid moments, they talked about her case, about Valdez, about the life she'd been living since the trial. 3 years of looking over my shoulder, she said one night, as the storm raged above them and the lantern cast flickering shadows on the stone walls. 3 years of wondering if every stranger on the street was the one who was going to kill me. How do you live like that? You don't live. You survive. There's a difference. She looked at him through fever-bright eyes. You know the difference, don't you? I've been surviving for 3 years too. Maybe we both deserve something better. Her hand found his in the darkness. It was a simple gesture, not romantic, not yet, just human connection in a moment of shared fear. But it felt like more than that. It felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that might be worth fighting for. On the morning of the second day, Daniel returned from a supply run to find Eleanor sitting up, more alert than she'd been since the shooting. Something's wrong, she said. What do you mean? Listen. He listened. The storm was still howling, still shaking the earth above them, but there was something else. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving through the ruins of the farmhouse. A voice drifted down, calm and professional. Dr. Mercer, I know you're nearby. I've been tracking you across this island for 2 days. You leave signs you don't even know you're leaving. Daniel and Elena locked eyes. The woman is dying anyway, from what I understand. You did your best, but bullet wounds are tricky things. Why not make this easy? Send her out, and you can go back to your quiet life. No one needs to know you were involved. Elena started to rise. Daniel pressed her back down. He won't let you live, she whispered. You're a witness now. I know. What do we do? Daniel's mind raced. He had the ketamine in his pocket. The flare gun was in Elena's hand. He'd given it to her as backup. The cellar had 2 exits, the main door above, and a narrow coal chute that had been used for deliveries decades ago. It was partially collapsed, but might still be passable. Can you move? He asked. I can try. There's a coal chute behind you. It comes up behind the barn. When I draw him down here, you go through it. Get to Hal's house. Lock yourself in. Don't open the door for anyone but me. No. Elena. No. Her voice was fierce despite her weakness. I'm not running while you get yourself killed. We do this together or not at all. There was no time to argue. Above them, the footsteps had stopped near the cellar door. Last chance, Doctor. Send her out, and this ends quietly. Make me come down there, and it ends badly for everyone. Daniel called up through the door. She's dead. Silence. She died 2 hours ago. Infection set in. The wound was worse than I thought. I couldn't save her. I don't believe you. Then come see for yourself. The cellar door creaked open. Grey daylight flooded in, the first real light they'd seen in 2 days. A shadow appeared at the top of the stairs, then began to descend. Daniel stood in the center of the cellar, hands visible, the syringe of ketamine hidden in his sleeve. Behind him, Eleanor lay motionless on the blankets, covered to her chin, eyes closed, playing dead, praying it would work. Cain emerged from the stairway, average height, forgettable face, a suppressed pistol held with professional ease. He moved with the controlled precision of someone who had done this many times before. Step back, Doctor. Daniel stepped back. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. Surgeon's hands. They didn't shake when it mattered. Kane approached Elena, keeping the gun trained on Daniel. He reached down with his free hand to check her pulse. And Eleanor's eyes snapped open. The flare gun she'd hidden under the blanket came up and fired. The flare caught Kane in the shoulder, the phosphorus igniting on impact, burning through his jacket into the flesh beneath. He screamed, the first human sound Daniel had heard him make, and spun toward the new threat. In that moment of distraction, Daniel moved. 20 years of surgery had taught him precision. 3 years of isolation had taught him patience. One moment of desperation taught him speed. The syringe plunged into Kane's neck before the hitman could complete his turn. 200 milligrams of ketamine straight into the bloodstream. Kane fired wildly. The bullet sparked off the stone wall inches from Daniel's head. Then his legs buckled. He tried to raise the gun again, but his arm wouldn't obey. His eyes went unfocused. His body crumpled. In 20 seconds, he was on the ground. In 30, he was unconscious. Daniel stood over him, breathing hard, the empty syringe still in his hand. The smell of burning fabric and phosphorus filled the cellar. His ears rang from the gunshot in the enclosed space. Eleanor pushed herself up from the blankets, the empty flare gun still clutched in her fingers. "I thought I told you to run," Daniel said. "You told me prosecutors don't give up." She smiled weakly. "I was listening." They secured Kane with medical tape and rope, checked his vitals, stable, the ketamine would keep him out for hours, and made the slow journey to Hal's house. The storm had finally begun to weaken. The rain was lighter, the wind less fierce, the first patches of grey sky visible between the clouds. Hal was waiting on his porch, revolver in hand. This him? This is him. Daniel dumped Kane's unconscious body on the porch. Marcus Kane. Professional killer. There's a federal warrant out for him, but no one's ever been able to serve it. Hal looked at the hitman, then at Daniel, then at Elena, leaning heavily against the porch railing. "Well," he said, "guess Shelter Island just made some history." He unlocked the door to his small holding cell, a room with iron bars that probably hadn't been used in decades. "Let's get him locked up before he wakes." They secured Kane in the cell. Hal locked it with a key that was stiff from disuse, but still functioned. "I'll watch him," Hal said. "You take care of her. Ferries should be able to run tomorrow if this storm keeps letting up. We'll get proper authorities out here then." Daniel helped Elena into Hal's living room, eased her onto the couch. She was pale, exhausted, clearly in pain, but alive. They were both alive. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up. For coming after me when you could have stayed safe." "I told you. Old habits. Is that all it was?" She met his eyes. "Habit?" He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The ferry ran the next morning, cutting through swells that were still rough but manageable. FBI agents arrived on the first boat. Elena's contacts, summoned by satellite phone once Hal's radio link to the mainland was restored. Kane was transferred to federal custody without incident. He said nothing during the handover, his face as blank and forgettable as it had been on the ferry 3 days earlier. But he was done. Caught, finally, after years of being a ghost. Eleanor gave a statement from a wheelchair. She'd refused to leave the island until the job was finished. "His name is Marcus Kane. He works exclusively for cartels. You'll find communications on his phone, payment records, everything you need to trace the network." The agents were professional, thorough, and clearly relieved. Elena Vance was one of their best. Losing her to a cartel contract would have been a devastating blow. Daniel was questioned too. He told the truth, saw something wrong, intervened, did what he was trained to do. The agents seemed satisfied, even impressed. One of them lingered after the formal interview. "Dr. Mercer," she said, "your name came up in our database. Malpractice case, a few years back. License revoked." Daniel tensed. "Is that going to be a problem?" "Just the opposite." She handed him a card. I looked at the case file. Something about it didn't add up. The evidence was too clean, too convenient. I know someone at the state medical board. It might be worth reopening. "Why would you do that?" "Because you just saved one of our best prosecutors using skills you weren't supposed to have anymore. Seems to me the system failed you." She nodded toward Elena, who was being loaded onto a stretcher for transport to a mainland hospital. "Take care of her. She's been through a lot." "I know." The next few days blurred together. Elena was transferred to a hospital on the mainland for observation and proper treatment. Daniel stayed on the island, cleaning up his clinic, rebuilding the life that had been disrupted. But something had changed. The isolation that had felt like protection now felt like a cage. A week after the ferry resumed, Elena called. "They want me back," she said. "The Valdez case broke open a dozen other investigations. I'm the only one who knows all the connections. Are you going?" "I don't know." There was a pause, static on the line. "I've spent 3 years fighting, Daniel. Running and fighting. I'm tired. What's the alternative? That's what I'm trying to figure out." He wanted to tell her to stay, to come back to the island, to the cottage that had been her grandmother's, to him. But he couldn't make that choice for her. She'd spent too long having choices taken away. "Whatever you decide," he said, "I'll be here. Promise. Promise." 6 months later. Spring had come to Shelter Island. The summer people were starting to return, reopening their cottages, filling the streets with life and noise that the winter residents had almost forgotten. The ferry ran twice daily now, and the harbour was busy with fishing boats and pleasure craft. Daniel was at his clinic, finishing up with a patient, a fisherman who'd cut his hand on a winch, when he heard the ferry horn. He walked to the harbour out of habit, the same routine he'd followed for 3.5 years. The boat was docking, passengers disembarking, the usual bustle of arrival. Then he saw her. Elena stepped off the gangway, carrying a single bag. Not a suitcase, something smaller. Staying, not visiting. The shadows under her eyes were gone. The haunted look had faded. She moved through the crowd with a confidence he hadn't seen in her before. The confidence of someone who had finally stopped running. She found him at the edge of the dock, waiting without realizing he'd been waiting. "It's done," she said. "Valdez died in prison last month, heart attack, though I have my doubts. Either way, the contract died with him. And your career?" "I resigned." She smiled, a real smile, the first he'd ever seen from her. 20 years was enough. "I finished the cases that needed finishing, handed off the rest." "So what now?" "I heard there's an island off the coast of Maine where interesting things happen. Figured I'd check it out. I hear the doctor there is pretty good. I hear he's overqualified for the job." She stepped closer. "I also heard someone's been working to clear his name. Anonymous evidence to the state medical board. Witness statements that were never taken during the original investigation." Daniel stared at her. "That was you. I told you I'd come back. I didn't say I'd come back empty-handed." She took his hand, the same gesture she'd made in the cellar, but different now, deliberate, certain. Your license will be reinstated within the year. You can go back to surgery if you want, or stay here, or something in between. The point is, now you have a choice. And if I choose to stay, then I'd say that sounds like a good start. Evening at the Whitfield cottage. They'd spent the past months working on it together. Daniel helping with repairs, both of them making it into something new. The dust was gone, the windows were clean, and the photographs on the walls had been joined by new ones. Eleanor and Daniel on the porch, Eleanor and Ruth at the general store, Daniel and Hal playing chess in the constable's kitchen. They sat on the porch now, watching the sunset over the Atlantic, the same view Eleanor had watched as a child, before the world became complicated and dangerous. She leaned into him. He put his arm around her. Neither of them was running anymore. Neither of them was hiding. They were just living, together, on an island at the edge of the world, where a storm had brought them together and taught them both that some things were worth fighting for. The lighthouse beam swept across the water as darkness fell. The waves crashed against the rocks below, the same eternal rhythm that had sounded on this island for thousands of years. Daniel Mercer had been a surgeon who lost everything. Elena Vance had been a prosecutor who fought until she couldn't fight anymore. Now they were just two people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided to build something from what remained. Not the lives they had planned, the lives they had chosen. And that, in the end, was what mattered.